BYU is a place that's thought to be behind the times on a number of different things, but has BYU football been ahead of the curve on something that could change a long-standing tradition in college football? Let's dig into it.
You are Locked On Cougars, your daily podcast on the BYU Cougars, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, everybody? I'm Jake Hatch, your host here on Locked On Cougars, resident BYU insider. Thank you for making Locked On Cougars your first listen of the day, and more importantly, thank you for being everydayers with us right here on your original daily podcast focused on the BYU Cougars. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. Super Bowl 59 is here. There's no better way to make every moment more exciting than with our friends at the FanDuel Sportsbook. New customers can bet just $5 and get up to $200 in bonus bets back. Download the app today or head to FanDuel.com to get started. All right, coming up on today's show, we're going to talk about the future of spring games in college football and how BYU might have been ahead of the curve on this whole time. We'll also talk about BYU basketball and Richie Saunders. He is making a strong push that he should be first team All Big 12 come the end of the season at the halfway mark. And then we'll also talk about the return of Logan Latui for BYU on the defensive line. What does that mean for BYU's defensive ends in particular? We'll finish up with that on today's podcast. All right, so here's the deal. BYU is a school that has traditionally struggled to put on any type of meaningful spring game. And I don't mean that in a bad way. Just think about it. A couple years ago, BYU didn't, not a couple years ago, it was like 4 or 5 years ago, simply didn't have enough offensive linemen to stage a game. There was a year where BYU used Christian Stewart as their spring camp quarterback, even though he had already graduated, simply because they didn't have any bodies or anybody to play the position in spring ball. More recently, they were changing out the grass at Lavelle Edwards Stadium, necessitating a move over to the old Provo High campus and playing on the turf there. But really, BYU's spring game is a farce. It just doesn't really exist at this point. But has it been ahead of the curve this whole time? In this era of NIL and the era of transfer portal, more and more coaches are so uptight about tampering and about poaching off of their rosters. The most recent example of this is Nebraska. Matt Rhule, the head coach of Nebraska, said this about the chances of Nebraska holding their spring game this year, by the way, which had 60,452 people attend the game last year. It's one of the biggest and most well-attended / major revenue generator for Nebraska athletics. But Matt Rhule said this Saturday: the word tampering doesn't exist anymore. It's just an absolute free, open, common market. I don't necessarily want to open up to the outside world and have people watch our guys and say, hey, he looks like a pretty good player. Let's go get him, unquote. Also adds this: last year, after they had their game, it was broadcast on the Big Ten Network. Like I said, 60,000 plus there in Lincoln to watch. He said this, quote, I dealt with a lot of people offering our players a lot of opportunities after that, Rhule said. So you go out and bring in a bunch of new players and showcase them for all the other schools to watch. Doesn't make a lot of sense to me, unquote. He is saying that they may do away with one of the most well-respected, most traditional spring games in the entire country. He says more than likely he's going to nix it. Now, could that come back if a new coach takes over at some point down the road at Nebraska? Sure thing. But I think that the concern that Matt Rhule shares here, I'm telling you, other coaches share it as well. They are terrified at the proposition of having one of their players go out there, put on a show, and then have some high money booster from another school make inroads or reach out to a kid's parents, his high school coach, his agent, whoever it might be, and say, hey, there's this much money in the market for him if he wants to go into the transfer portal. I don't know what BYU's plans are with regards to their spring game, and I would bet at this juncture BYU will go against it because it's just not something they have done. They've already announced they're going to have their alumni game, which has been a pretty nice fill-in for BYU not having a traditional spring scrimmage or game. And I think that may be the way that BYU goes forward. And then, quite frankly, if other schools like Nebraska are smart, they may look at BYU and say, hey, that's a model maybe we should adopt. It allows legends of these schools, BYU, and in the case we're just talking about Nebraska, to come back, be hailed as the conquering heroes that they are by their fans, but also at the same time, allow fans to go out and enjoy something at the end of spring that wraps up spring camp. So it's crazy to think, once again, like I said in the open of today's show, that BYU has traditionally been a school that's thought to be behind the times, and maybe, just maybe, without even meaning to, they may have been ahead of the curve this whole time with regards to the future of spring games. I don't necessarily want to see spring games go anywhere. I'll be very blunt about that. It's actually been a really fun facet and a fun thing to wrap up spring camp with. But the history of BYU, especially under Kalani Sitake's tenure, hasn't happened very often. And I think that an alumni game has proven to be, like I said, a very nice filler for the lack of a traditional spring game. The other thing that Matt Rhule talks about is the fact that he's going to continue to tackle during spring camp, and that comes with it the risk of injury. Kalani Sitake has made it very clear that he will continue to have his guys tackle in practice, and that heightens the chances of guys getting injured during spring camp. But putting things on TV, and we all know that BYU TV has been very vociferous in chasing any and all opportunities to broadcast BYU football events. And you give them a chance to broadcast a BYU spring game, they'll be all over it. I think that this actually is a pretty savvy move if you want to move to this model where it's an alumni game. You allow these great quarterbacks of yesteryear for BYU to come back. Who can forget Steve Young tossing that touchdown pass over at the old Provo High, and all the current and former players just hooting and hollering, and the fans that were there in the stands having a great time. I think it's a great fill-in. It's a great way to wrap up spring camp, and also gives Kalani Sitake and his coaches that extra cover that Matt Rhule is talking about here, to not have other teams watching your roster saying, hey, that guy looks good, let's go get this guy. He also adds the one other thing here, speaking of Matt Rhule, saying at the end of it, asked if there would be a spring game with a scrimmage format to wrap up spring camp. I don't know that yet, but if I'm going to be honest with you, I highly doubt it. It sounds like Nebraska, if they're going to do away with it, watch for other schools to make convenient changes to their spring format. There will be some schools who still do it because, like I said, there are other schools that have massive attendance figures. I think Alabama, Bryant Denny's been sold out before for the spring game, and that's, was it 80 some odd thousand people? That can be a pretty nice revenue generator. BYU doesn't get near that. I think the most I've ever seen in an attendance in my life at a BYU spring game may have been 15, 20,000 people, not even a third of Lavelle Edwards Stadium filled for that. So crazily enough, maybe, just maybe, the BYU Cougars were ahead of the curve on something here, and it could end up becoming a trend across college football, especially with the lack of rules around tampering, NIL, transfer portal, all the different things these coaches are complaining about, which I will also add the caveat. Okay, you can complain about it all you want, Matt Rhule. You can complain about all you insert coach name here, but let's be honest. You're doing the exact same thing that everybody else is doing out there. They're all looking at each other's rosters. It's all that the kind of the three-way situation, that meme with the Spider-Man. It's like, all right, who's going first? They're all looking at each other's rosters, and I can't absolve BYU in any way, shape, or form. But that's the modern day and age of college sports, and it sure looks like the future could be that less and less opportunities to watch your favorite players could be in the future of college football. And that's unfortunate for the fans, but it's a reality of these coaches being as myopic and as concerned about keeping their rosters intact as they are. All right, coming up next, we're going to flip over and talk some BYU basketball. 4 straight win over UCF over the weekend. Very nice showing for the Cougars in Orlando. Now they get ready for Arizona, but a guy has emerged, and I think he is not getting enough credit for everything he's doing for the BYU basketball program, and he is Richie Saunders, and I'll explain more why next. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. Super Bowl 59 is here. 1 game, 2 teams, and it's the big game. Endless possibilities abound in the Super Bowl, and there's no better way to make every play more exciting than with the FanDuel Sportsbook, my friends. Whether it's predicting the first touchdown, calling who the MVP will be, or even betting on the coin toss, FanDuel makes it easy. And to get in on all that action with live betting all game long, you can adjust your bets as the game unfolds and feel the thrill from kickoff until the final whistle. Live betting feature allows you to stay involved no matter what happens on the field, and the app is super easy to navigate, and more importantly, plus knowing you can place a $5 bet and potentially win up to $200 in bonus bets. Why wouldn't you go for it with the Super Bowl? That's the icing on the cake, my friends. So take advantage today. Download the app or head to FanDuel.com and get started today. Bet just $5, and if you win, you'll score $200 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com to get started, or download the FanDuel app. Bet with FanDuel, as they are an official partner of Super Bowl 59. Thank you once again for making Locked On Cougars your first listen of the day. Appreciate all of you being with us. Hope you had a fantastic weekend, whatever you were doing out there. Some nice little break from the cold weather here along the Wasatch Front. So we're getting like the upper 50s, 60s today. Snow melts might enough. The snow melts enough. I might be hitting the golf course, but regardless, hope you had a fantastic weekend. The BYU men's basketball program, they're riding high right now. 4 straight victories in Big 12 play. BYU, as it stands right now, heading in now officially the back half of the Big 12 schedule. They have made it through 10 games. They sit at 6-4. And things are looking up for BYU right now. They are the highest rated team outside of the ranked teams in the Big 12 right now. If the Big 12 tournament started today, BYU would have the 5th seed. They're tied for 5th with Baylor and Kansas currently. But BYU's got to be thinking, hey, we got a chance to really push here. Now you have a huge showdown tomorrow night against the Arizona Wildcats. Late night, 9 p.m. tip at the Marriott Center. It's kind of reminiscent of remember the Big Monday tip-offs? Like, what was it, 10 o'clock Mountain Time way back in the day on those Monday nights? It's reminiscent of that, but it's a huge opportunity for BYU to run that record to 5 straight wins. It's going to be a tough one because Arizona is tied atop the Big 12 alongside Houston at 9-1. The Cats are absolutely rolling right now, and they will be coming in intent on making sure that BYU knows their place in the Big 12. But the X factor in all this, it feels like for BYU, is the play of Richie Saunders. More and more, the more I watch this BYU basketball team, I shudder to think where BYU would be without Richie Saunders. Remember, when Mark Pope left BYU to be the head coach of Kentucky, Richie entered the transfer portal and looked around. He made that high-profile visit. There were photos of him and video of him in Lexington visiting Mark Pope to check out things with the Wildcats. BYU's lucky that Richie decided BYU is where his heart was because he has been an absolute force for BYU this year. Gregor Bell put this out last night that Richie Saunders, halfway through the Big 12 conference play right now, he is first in 3-point field goal percentage, first in 3-point field goals made per game, third in points per game in the conference, and third in field goal percentage across the entire conference. That is a first-team All-Big 12 honoree, and get used to the name Richie Saunders. He is putting up absolutely monster numbers, and BYU's lucky that they have him right now. He's playing a career-high 28.2 minutes per game through 20 games so far this season. His field goal percentage is dipped just a tiny bit from last season to 51.2%, but his three-point percentage, as I mentioned, number one in the league right now, 45.3%. It's almost 10 points higher than it was last year at 36.4%. He has taken an absolutely gargantuan leap, and BYU is lucky to have him doing it because, once again, I will reiterate, if BYU did not have him currently, where would the offense be coming from? Would a guy like Jaeger Demon be even more scrutinized than he already is? Would Dallin Hall be getting more of the microscope on him? With Fousseyni Traore? There are so many different players out there that BYU would try to fill the gap with, but they are so lucky that Richie has taken the leap, and B, is doing it at Brigham Young University. He halfway through the conference season, Richie, you can pencil him in for first team All Big 12 honors. Will that ultimately happen in the end? If I have my say as I don't get a vote these days when it comes to the Big 12, at least currently as it stands. But if I have a vote, Richie would absolutely be on that first team All Big 12 ballot for me right now. He is doing everything. He is the heart and soul of BYU basketball. And the crazy thing is BYU heads into the back half of their conference season. They have righted the ship, and it's due in no small part to what Richie Saunders has done. Quite frankly, the worst games Richie has had, I look at that Houston game in particular, that's when BYU struggled the most on the court. But when he's playing his steady, consistent way of basketball that he's been playing for most of this conference season, BYU's got a fighting chance in every one of these games. They got to be feeling good about themselves, and they should be. They're riding a 4-game win streak. Remember, they have righted the ship from a 1-3 start in conference play and now are 2 games above 500. If you can continue this pace, BYU should find themselves very easily on the right side of the bubble heading into Selection Sunday in early March. That's the positive right now for BYU, but the work isn't done. 10 games to go, and it's a doozy. BYU's got their work cut out for them because it starts tomorrow with Arizona. You get a proverbial breather on Saturday. We make the trip over to Cincinnati. Now, Cincinnati's dropped 6 straight, but then you're at West Virginia. You're home to Kansas State. You're home to Kansas. At Arizona State. The two Arizona swing there. Home to West Virginia. At Iowa State. And then you finish it up against Utah. The only game that's not a Q2 or better game, so essentially resume building games, the only one at this current juncture that's not that is that home game against Utah at the end of the season. Everything else, and the majority of them, are Q1 games here for BYU. So if they can continue to just do their thing and play the way that they've been playing basketball, this is a BYU team that should find itself in the NCAA tournament, and they have proverbially found themselves at the right time. It's February. This is where it gets really, really heavy because tired legs settle in. Injuries can be absolutely devastating this time of year, and knock on wood, BYU has dealt with their fair share of injuries this year. Dallin Hall, Jaeger Demon. There have been multiple guys who missed multiple games. Richie even missed a little bit of time. Remember when he took that shoulder to the face that busted up his lip and gave him a concussion against Wyoming in the Delta Center. They have dealt with their share of injuries, but they've navigated all of it, and they have come into their own as a team. And going back to the original premise here, Richie Saunders, he is what BYU is needed, and he's the heartbeat that makes this BYU team go. There's really nice pieces across the board. You got a freak athlete in Keba Keita at center who is showing he's showing growth with his offensive arsenal. You're looking at Fousseyni Traore, who seems just to be a little bit off, but I've got faith that BYU's all-time leader in field goal percentage and Foose, he's going to come back around, and his feathery touch around the rim, it's going to resume doing what it's doing. Cannon Catchings and Jaeger Demon, they are finally starting to figure things out, and they're offering more consistent play on both ends of the court, it feels like. Everything is looking like it is coming into focus for this BYU basketball team, but it doesn't, I think, really come together without what Richie Saunders is doing. John Rossing has forever called him the glue guy of glue guys in college basketball, and for good reason, because he was the sixth man who made everything work for BYU. This year, though, Richie stepped into the limelight and said, I'm the captain now, to use the Captain Phillips line, that meme. He is running everything for BYU, and everything should be running through him. Is he a guy you can toss the ball to and say, hey, go create something for yourself? Not really, because that's just not Richie's game. But the nice part is Kevin Young and his coaching staff are cooking up game plans that are getting Richie into winning situations, and all he does is make incredible plays. That's what I love about what Richie Saunders offers to this BYU basketball team. And any and all success BYU has down the stretch run here, the final 10 games of conference play leading up to the Big 12 tournament, it's going to be because Richie is that engine that makes everything go for the BYU basketball program. And I really think it's been incredible to watch him. And I don't know, maybe I'm wrong about this, but it feels like in some ways he has gone overlooked and almost underappreciated for everything he's offered to BYU this season. So I just wanted to take a minute and say, Richie, props to you, man, because it's been really, really cool to see him take this leap. And those numbers, everything that he is offering to BYU, screamed to me that's a guy who should be a first-team All-Big 12 honoree. And so long as BYU stays in the top half of the Big 12 conference race, he absolutely will be in the mix for that. There are a lot of other really good players out there on these potential All-Big 12 lists, but I'm telling you, everything Richie offers, it matches every one of those guys and outdoes them in so many different categories. And the stats back it up. Like I said with Greg, he's got top tier numbers for BYU, and BYU would be lost without him. And so it's really cool to see him having taken this leap, and hopefully his play will help BYU elevate in the final stanza of the season and find themselves in the big dance come March when it really gets real. All right, we'll finish up today's show flipping back over to football. An interesting announcement over the weekend. Logan Latui announced he's coming back to BYU, and I was surprised that he made this announcement, but what does he offer to BYU at defensive end as he comes back for what will be a super senior year with the BYU football program? We'll delve into that next right here on Locked On Cougars. Thank you once again for making Locked On Cougars your first listen of the day. If you have not done so already, please consider joining the Locked On Cougars Insider Group. It's a great way to get the inside intel on everything I'm hearing about BYU sports. The best part is just $5 a month to be a part of the group. You get text messages. That's the best part about it is it's not having to go to a message board or log on to a website to get the inside intel that you crave. It comes to your phone in the form of a text message. You can fire back with thoughts of your own, have feedback for the show, have one-on-one conversations with myself, all for just $5 a month. And I guess the kicker on all of this, you get a 14-day free trial before you're charged anything, 2 full weeks of access. So join us today. Link is in the show notes, whether you're watching this on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast. There's a hyperlink that says join the Locked On Cougars Insider Group here with a little link. Click it, join up today, and be a part of the Locked On Cougars Insider Group. All right, you may have seen it over the weekend amidst all the other trade news with regards to the NBA. And by the way, Luka Doncic to the Los Angeles Lakers. Crazy, crazy times. I will be checking out Locked On NBA all day today and Locked On Lakers, etc., for reaction to that. But regardless, amidst all that, Logan Latui announced he's running it back for one more year with BYU. And I was surprised by this. Logan was a guy who walked on senior night against Houston this past season. I thought it was his final run at BYU, but apparently he has an extra year of eligibility and decided, you know what, I'm going to make another run at it. What I like about this, so there's a positive and a negative, I feel like, to Logan Latui returning to BYU. Is the positive is he brings veteran leadership to a defensive ends group that looked like it was going to be a little short on that experience. If you look at what BYU's defensive ends had this past year, you had Tyler Batty, obviously, you had Isaiah Banya, and they were the two senior leaders that everybody looked to in that unit. And Logan Latui was also right there. I thought some other of these guys were looking up to them and trying to learn from them. But with what I thought was Tyler Batty exiting, who, by the way, had a really, really fine showing at the Shrine Bowl over the weekend. Got a lot of positive pub and looks like he may have improved his draft stock. So congratulations to him. But Isaiah Banya, the same thing. They were guys that the younger players looked to say, okay, what do I need to do in this circumstance? And how do I respond to circumstances like this? Well, Logan Latui was also a guy who's set to be exiting the program. Well, him coming back, I think, offers at minimum some veteran leadership that should help some of these younger players navigate maybe some of the tougher scenarios that maybe they weren't prepared for as they step into what will be upperclassmen and leadership roles going forward. Other guys who are going to be in the mix here include Bodie Schoonover, and Bodie has played a fair amount at BYU, but even though I think he's a redshirt junior this year for Bodie, he's played very little compared to what a guy like Logan Latui does. And even though he figures to be one of those veteran leaders, we're short on experience. So that's what Logan Latui brings at minimum, is he brings veteran experience. But the other thing is he can come in and show guys, okay, here's how we navigated certain things in our first run through the Big 12. And obviously success that BYU had in 2024. A lot of those hard lessons from 2023 provided BYU the framework to build on that and put together what 2024 entailed. They're going to try and carry that forward in 2025, and Logan can help do that. You have a lot of young talent, though, at defensive end. Viliami Apuha. You also have Ephraim Asiata. Then you also have some of the young bucks that are transferring into this program. Hunter Clegg, coming off a mission for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Former four-star prospect who signed with Utah, flipped to BYU. What can he offer? Tausili Akana, he's been at Texas for a little while, but has very scant experience in terms of on-field play. You have guys like Kenny Laufonohema, who's a former stud at Springville High School. There's a lot of young talent at defensive end, and I think all of them have the potential to be the type of players that BYU needs them to be, but they need time to develop. So here's the deal. Logan Latui is probably going to take reps away, and this is the one negative of Logan Latui returning. It's kind of relative, but he takes reps away in the early part of the season for BYU from some of these younger players. He figures to be a starter for BYU at defensive end. That's maybe why he's coming back, to maybe get some extra film for a run at professional football. But the bigger thing is he is going to probably be a starter game one against Portland State for BYU. But I would venture to say, and this is my personal thought on the matter, is that by midseason, he's supplanted as a starter for one of these younger players, whether it is potentially a Bodie Schoonover who may play the same position as him, or let's say it is like a Tausili Akana comes into a zone and can really be the player that BYU envisions for him early on in his time at BYU. I think in time, that veteran leadership role is something that takes a back seat. That doesn't take a back seat. The leadership role continues, but he takes a back seat as a backup to finish up his career at BYU while you let the other younger players step up into the spot that you were filling for the BYU football program. Hopefully that makes sense, because once again, I do think at the start of the season, some people are going to be a little miffed saying, well, why is he starting at defensive end? He should be a guy who's playing a different role. Well, guess what? Just simply for the experience factor alone, I think that Jay Hill will look his way, because this is a guy, speaking of Logan, who was recruited by Jay Hill to Weber State originally. He left Weber State and transferred to BYU as a walk-on before Jay arrived in Provo. But the second that Jay Hill showed up in Provo, they reunited, and Logan's been a key part of the rotation the entire time. So that experience factor alone is going to give him a major opportunity to make an impression early on in the season. But I think given time, you will see his playing time probably decrease this season as the younger players get a little more seasoned. Because once again, I mentioned Viliame Puha, Kini Lafono Hema. I also forgot Ryan Miley Kaufusi. I think he's a guy that had a lot of plaudits coming out of high school and after a mission. Maybe at this point, he's finally ready to step up. But I just look at it and say, you know what? There's a lot of talent at defensive end that's lacking on experience. And the experience factor is what Logan Latui can offer early on until the younger players get up to speed and are ready to step into those roles. So I actually kind of like this decision by Logan Latui to return, even though on its head you're screaming, well, it's going to take playing time away from these young players. I get that. But I think that Jay Hill, he is smart enough to see the bigger vision of all of this. And in fact, I would venture to say he's got a bigger vision overall than any of us for what his defense looks like. And when a guy like Logan Latui, this is just my thought, went to him and said, hey, coach, I'm thinking about running it back for another year. I would envision that Jay said, yeah, let's do it, because what you can offer is an experience and leadership quality that I need at least through the early part of this coming season. And there may have been a very frank conversation saying, hey, at some point we may bench you in favor of one of these younger players. But I don't think Logan Latui is a guy who's like, you know what, I'm going to be making millions of dollars one day in the NFL. I don't think he has that vision in his mind. He'd probably like to play professional football given the opportunity, as all of these players would like to do, because I don't know a single college football player who doesn't have NFL aspirations. If they don't, I'm stunned, because they are some of the best players. Like, we think about how rare it is to make it as a college football player. I had dreams of playing college football, and I was nowhere near getting there. All these young men have oodles and oodles of athletic ability, and they're trying to hone it and obviously craft a potential to pay for their families and set themselves up for their future via playing the game that they love. And I can respect that every one of them want to give it everything they've got. And I think that this is just the latest example what Logan Latui is doing here. But I also think that he has an understanding that while it may not work out in professional football, he also can be a leader of men in his time playing the game that he loves at the same time, and help set up the next generation of BYU football players and help them have success along the path. So there you go. That's what I got for you guys on this Monday edition of the show. Hope you guys are all doing well. Once again, had a fantastic weekend doing whatever you were doing, but we got a fun week ahead. We have got the Big 12 schedule being announced tomorrow. We got BYU basketball playing Arizona tomorrow night at the Marriott Center. Wednesday is actually officially National Signing Day. Now it's going to be pretty light in terms of announcements from BYU, but we may learn a little bit more about what this class entails for BYU at that point. So we'll have plenty of coverage for you guys in the week ahead. So as always, make sure you subscribe, rate, review, hit the bell notification icon if you're watching this on YouTube so you get alerted when a new episode drops. But as always, thank you for your support of the podcast. Thank you for making it your first listen of the day. And once again, as always, as we are fond of saying, thank you for being everydayers with us right here on the Locked On Cougars podcast.